Welcome to our deep dive into identity and access management.
IAM.
IAM, yeah, for short.
Right.
I have been looking through all the sources that you provided, and
Oh, yeah.
it looks like we've got some really interesting stuff here.
Yeah, we do.
Um, a lot about like kind of the foundational elements of IAM,
Hmm.
but also some really interesting articles and pieces about kind of where it's headed in the future.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious to kind of see what gems we uncover here.
Yeah, me too. It's one of those things that I think a lot of folks kind of have a baseline awareness of.
Yeah.
They know what it is, but maybe they don't know kind of the depth of it.
Yeah.
So I think this will be a good deep dive.
Yeah, I think so too. And one thing that really surprised me going through these sources is just how many data breaches actually come down to like poor IAM practices.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like having like a state-of-the-art security system,
Right.
but then you just leave the front door wide open.
Yeah, you gotta use it, right? Like it's not just about having it, it's about making sure that it's implemented properly and used properly.
Yeah, and that kind of gets to like the core concept of IAM, which is all about, controlling who has access to what
Mm-hmm.
in this digital world.
Absolutely. It's, like in the real world, we have keys and badges,
Yeah.
to get into places or to be able to do certain things. And this is really the digital equivalent of that
Okay, so it's like the digital keys and badges to all of our accounts.
to our accounts, to our data, to applications,
Mhm.
all sorts of different
And
things.
it's not just about like one master key that gets you into everything.
Yeah,
It's about like these different levels of access.
exactly. It's not a one size fits all approach.
Right.
It's very granular. It's all about giving people the right level of access for what they need to do.
Okay, so how does that actually work in practice?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
I know we've got these sources talk about all these different ways to, verify someone's identity.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like it's gone way beyond just typing in a password these days.
Well, yeah. I mean, passwords are still around. I mean,
Right.
everybody pretty much uses passwords in some form or fashion, but there's so much more now.
Yes.
We have things like biometrics.
Yeah.
So using your fingerprint or your face to unlock your phone or your computer.
Right.
And that's being used more and more in different systems.
Okay.
You have multi-factor authentication or MFA.
I've definitely encountered that where you've got to put
Yeah.
in your password and then also a code from your phone or something.
Exactly. That's a great example of MFA. And it can be a little annoying sometimes, I'll admit,
Right.
but it adds a significant layer of security.
It's like a double lock on the door.
Exactly. And then there's single sign-on SSO, which is, allows you to use one set of credential
Okay.
to access a bunch of different applications.
So that's super convenient.
Super convenient. Yeah.
But isn't that kind of risky? Like if someone gets a hold of those credentials?
Well, there's a trade-off there, right?
Right.
So the convenience comes with a little bit of risk. Yeah. If those credentials are compromised, then obviously they have access to more things.
Right.
But there are ways to mitigate that risk. You can have really strong authentication
Okay.
around that initial login.
So it's kind of like having a really secure master key.
Right.
That's like really hard to copy or something.
Exactly. Yeah, so it's about finding that balance
Oh, yeah.
between convenience and security.
Okay. So that's authentication, like proving who you are.
Hmm.
But then there's this whole other side of it, which is authorization.
Right. Authorization is all about what you can do once you're in.
Okay.
So, you might have the key to the building, but that doesn't mean you can go into every room.
Right. So it's like different clearance levels or something.
Exactly. Yeah, different clearance levels. So, in a company, for example,
Yeah.
you might have, the CEO who has access to everything.
Right.
And then you might have someone in the mailroom
Yeah.
who only has access to, the mailroom and maybe the break room. So it's about defining those roles and permissions very specifically.
Okay. So authorization is all about, okay, you're in, but where can you go and what can you do?
Exactly. Yeah. What can you change?
Okay.
Who can you interact with?
So like who can view certain files or approve certain transactions, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. All those things are determined by authorization policies.
Man, this is getting complicated already, and we're just getting started.
Well, and it gets more complicated because we haven't even talked about the life cycle of identities.
Oh, right.
People join companies, they change roles, they leave companies.
Yeah.
So we need a way to manage all that.
So it's like digital HR.
Kind of, yeah, like a digital HR department that's keeping track of everyone's comings and goings.
Yeah, making sure that people have the right access, and then when they leave, they don't have access anymore.
Exactly. Yeah, and if that process breaks down, that's when you get problems like zombie accounts.
Zombie again.
Yeah, these are accounts that haven't been deactivated properly.
Oh, so they're just out there lurking.
Yeah, and they're vulnerable to being exploited.
So it's like someone's moved out, but we left a key under the mat.
Yeah, exactly. It's a security risk.
Okay, so identity lifecycle management is all about keeping things tidy.
Keeping things tidy and up to date.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And making sure that the right people have the right access at the right time.
This seems like a lot to keep track of.
It is. It's a lot to keep track of, but the good news is that there are a lot of tools and technologies that can help.
Okay.
And one of the big advancements in recent years has been automation.
Okay, so tell me more about that.
So, imagine a system that can automatically provision access for new employees
Okay.
based on their job role.
So no more like manually creating accounts and assigning permissions.
Exactly. Yeah, it can all be automated.
Wow.
And when someone leaves the company, it can automatically deactivate their account,
Okay.
so you don't have to worry about those zombie accounts. It's all about streamlining those processes and making sure that things happen quickly and efficiently.
That seems like a huge time saver,
It is a huge time saver, and it also reduces the risk of human error.
right? Because if someone forgets to, deactivate an account,
Right.
then that's a whole security problem right there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But even with automation, I can't help but think about how complex this all seems. Especially these days, with everybody using the cloud and mobile devices and working remotely.
Yeah, it's a constantly evolving landscape.
Right.
It's not just about managing access to a few servers in a back room anymore.
Right.
We've got, people accessing data from all over the world.
Yeah.
On all sorts of different devices.
It's like trying to keep track of keys for like a whole city.
It is, yeah. It's a big challenge.
And all of this must cost a fortune.
It does cost money to implement and maintain a good IAM system.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that.
But I imagine the cost of like a data breach is way worse.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. It's like you're saying I can't afford a good lock.
Right.
But then someone breaks in and steals everything.
Exactly. Yeah. It's about investing in security up front
Okay.
to prevent those much larger costs down the line.
Right. So you're mitigating your risk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we've talked about complexity. We've talked
Yeah.
about cost.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this other element that seems to come up again and again in these sources, and that's user adoption.
Oh, yeah.
Like even if you have the best system in the world, if people don't use it right,
Right.
it's not going to work.
It's all for nothing.
Yeah.
It's like having a state-of-the-art security system in your house.
Yeah.
But you leave the windows open.
Right.
It defeats the purpose.
User education is key.
User education is absolutely key. People need to understand why these things are important.
Yeah.
They need to know how to use the systems properly.
Okay.
And they need to be bought into the idea that security is everyone's responsibility.
So it's not just about technology, it's about people.
It is absolutely about people.
Right.
It's about creating a culture of security within an organization.
Right. Where everybody kind of understands their role in keeping things safe.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here just in this first part of our deep dive.
Yeah. Okay.
We've talked about what IAM is. We've talked about why it's important.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about some of the key components,
Yep.
authentication, authorization,
Mm-hmm.
identity lifecycle management.
Yeah.
And we've even touched on some of the challenges like
Yeah.
complexity costs, user adoption.
It's a big topic.
It is a big topic, and I'm sure there's much more to come.
Absolutely.
All right, so we're back and ready to kind of dig a little deeper into some of these IAM concepts.
Yeah, I think we laid a good foundation in part one.
Yeah.
Talking about the kind of the basics of what it is and why it's important.
Right.
But, IAM is not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. It really looks different depending on what industry you're in.
Yeah. And we've got some sources here that talk about that.
Yeah.
Like healthcare and finance.
Oh, yeah. Those are big ones.
Right. Because the stakes are so high
Mm-hmm.
when you're dealing with people's health information or their financial data.
Absolutely. In healthcare, for example, you've got this constant tension between protecting patient privacy
Mm-hmm.
and making sure that healthcare providers have the information they need
Right.
to provide care.
So how do they balance that?
Well, it's a complex challenge.
Yeah.
They're using things like role-based access control
Okay.
to make sure that only authorized personnel can access certain types of data.
Okay.
And they're also implementing strong audit trails.
Right.
so that they can track who's accessed what information and when.
Okay, so it's kind of like a digital paper trail to
Exactly.
make sure that everything's above board.
Right. And then on the finance side,
Yeah.
you've got the rise of online banking and mobile payments. Right.
Which has created a whole new set of challenges.
Yeah, because now you've got people accessing their accounts from anywhere.
From anywhere, yeah.
And you don't necessarily know who's on the other end of that connection.
Exactly. So financial institutions are really having to up their game.
Yeah.
In terms of IAM, they're using things like multi-factor authentication, risk-based scoring,
Okay.
real-time transaction monitoring,
Yeah.
all sorts of things to try to prevent fraud.
It's like a digital arms race
It is, yeah.
between the banks and the fraudsters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The bad guys are always coming up with new ways to try to get around security measures.
Right.
So the banks have to constantly be innovating to stay ahead.
So it's not just about keeping external threats out. It's also about managing access within the organization.
Yeah, internal threats are a big concern as well.
Right.
You have to make sure that employees only have access to information and systems that they need to do their jobs. Right, because you don't want someone in marketing having access to, like, the financial records.
Exactly, yeah. Or someone in customer service being able to change someone's account information.
Right.
So it's all about striking that balance
Right.
between security and accessibility.
Okay, so too much security can kind of stifle things.
It can, yeah, it can make it harder for people to do their jobs.
Right.
But too much access creates vulnerabilities.
Right, so you got to find that sweet
We've
spot.
got to find that sweet spot, yeah.
So one thing that comes up a lot in these sources is automation.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like that's a key part of kind of managing all of this complexity.
Absolutely, yeah. As organizations grow
Yeah.
and adopt more and more cloud-based systems,
Right.
managing access manually just becomes impossible.
Yeah. You can't have someone sitting there creating accounts all day long.
No, you need a system that can do that automatically
Okay.
based on certain criteria.
So it's kind of like, if this, then that.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So if someone joins the company and they're in the marketing department,
Yeah.
they automatically get access to the marketing systems,
Okay.
but not the finance systems.
Right.
And then if they move to a different department,
Mm-hmm.
their access can be automatically updated.
Man, that sounds pretty slick.
It is pretty slick, yeah.
But what about all those other kind of trends that we hear about, like artificial intelligence,
AI.
AI? Yeah.
Yeah, AI is definitely playing a role in IAM.
Okay, so how is it being used?
Well, one way is in threat detection.
Okay.
So you can use machine learning algorithms
Okay.
to analyze user behavior
Mm-hmm.
and identify patterns that might indicate a security threat.
So it's like having a digital detective.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
Looking for clues.
Right.
This something's not right.
That's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool, yeah.
And what about that other thing, decentralized identity?
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, it sounds pretty futuristic.
It does sound futuristic.
So what is it exactly?
Well, the idea is to give individuals more control over their own data.
Okay.
So instead of having all these different companies and institutions
Yeah.
holding our identity information,
Right.
we would have our own digital wallets
Oh.
that we could use to selectively share information with others.
So it's kind of like having a digital passport.
Exactly. Yeah, like a digital passport that you control.
Okay.
And you decide who gets to see what information.
Man, that sounds pretty empowering,
It is empowering, yeah.
but also kind of complicated.
It is complicated, yeah. There are a lot of challenges that need to be worked out.
Yeah, like how do you make sure that it's secure?
Right.
How do you get everyone to buy into it?
Yeah, those are big questions.
Okay, so a lot of potential, but also a lot of hurdles to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've talked about some of these like big picture trends,
Yeah.
but what about some real world examples of how IAM is actually being used?
Okay, well, there's a case study in one of these sources
Okay.
about a major retailer that suffered a massive data breach.
Oh, okay, I think I remember that one.
Yeah, it was a big one.
Yeah, a lot of people's information got compromised.
Yeah, it was bad.
So what happened?
Well, it turned out that they had some pretty weak IAM practices in place.
Go on.
They didn't have multi-factor authentication enabled.
Oh.
They had weak passwords,
Okay.
and their access controls were pretty lax.
So basically they were just asking to be hacked.
Pretty much, yeah.
So what did they do after the breach?
Well, they had to do a lot of damage control.
Yeah.
They had to notify all of their customers.
Right.
They had to offer credit monitoring,
Mm-hmm.
and they had to pay a lot of fines.
Ouch.
Yeah, it was expensive.
So I guess the lesson there is that IAM is not something you can afford to ignore.
No, you can't afford to ignore it.
Right.
It's an essential part of doing business in the digital age.
And it's not a one-time fix.
No, it's an ongoing process. You
Well,
have to
yeah.
constantly be evaluating your systems,
Yeah.
looking for vulnerabilities,
Huh.
and making sure that you're staying ahead of the bad guys.
That's like a never-ending battle.
It is, yeah, but it's a battle that we have to fight.
Right, because the stakes are too high.
Absolutely.
If we lose that battle,
Mhm.
then we lose our privacy, our security, our everything.
It's true. And, it's not just about preventing breaches.
Right.
It's also about minimizing the damage if a breach does occur.
Right.
And that's where the principle of least privilege comes in.
Okay, remind me what that is again.
So the principle of least privilege is the idea that you should only give people access to the information and systems that they absolutely need to do their jobs.
Right, so don't give them more access than they need.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so how does that actually work in practice?
Well, let's say you have an employee who's working in the accounting department.
Okay.
They need access to the accounting system,
Right.
but they don't need access to the customer database.
Right.
So you would restrict their access
Okay.
to only the accounting system.
Okay, so if their account gets compromised,
Mm-hmm.
the hacker wouldn't be able to access the customer data.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so it's like damage control.
It is. Yeah, it's about containing the damage.
Okay, that makes sense.
And it's a good practice to follow even if you don't think you're at risk of a breach.
Right, better safe than sorry.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
In this second part of our deep dive,
Mm-hmm.
we've looked at how IAM is being applied in different industries.
Yeah.
We've explored some of the emerging trends,
Mm-hmm.
like AI, decentralized identity,
Yeah.
and we've even delved into some real-world examples.
Yep.
So I'm really excited to see what we uncover in the final part of our deep dive.
Yeah, me too. It's going to be interesting to kind of look ahead.
Right.
And see what the future holds for IAM.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into IAM. And we've talked about a lot of the technical details and challenges, but I want to kind of step back and look at the bigger picture.
Right.
What's the future of IAM?
The future, huh?
Yeah.
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
But if I had to make a prediction,
Yeah.
I'd say that IAM is only going to become more important
Okay.
in the years to come.
Okay.
As our lives become more and more digital,
Right.
our digital identities are going to become just as important as our physical identities.
Yeah. And some of these sources paint a pretty interesting picture of what that might look like.
Oh, yeah.
Like I was reading about this idea of like our digital identities following us everywhere we go.
Oh, yeah. That's definitely a possibility.
Yeah, like imagine walking into a store
Mm-hmm.
and instead of having to pull out your wallet or your phone,
Right.
you're just automatically recognized.
Yeah. You just walk in and they know who you are.
Yeah, and they can like pull up your purchase history and
Yeah.
all that stuff.
Yeah. It's kind of a double-edged sword. Right.
Yeah.
On the one hand, it's super convenient.
Yeah.
But on the other hand,
Yeah.
it's a little creepy.
A little Big Brother-ish.
A little bit, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it raises a lot of questions about privacy.
Yeah, like who has access to all that data?
Right.
And how is it being used?
Yeah, those are important questions.
And it's not just about like the convenience factor, it's also about like control.
Mm-hmm.
Like who owns our digital identities?
Right.
And who gets to decide how that information is used?
Yeah, I think those are the questions that we really need to be grappling with
Yeah.
as we move into this future.
And it's not just about like the data itself, it's also about like the systems that are managing that data.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were talking about AI before.
Right.
And how it can be used to, make IAM systems more secure.
Yeah.
But it also raises some ethical questions.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, how do we make sure that these AI systems aren't biased
Right.
or that they're not being used to discriminate against certain groups of people?
Yeah, that's a huge concern.
And then there's the whole issue of like transparency and accountability. Like if an AI system makes a decision,
Right.
how do we know why it made that decision?
Exactly. And who's responsible if something goes wrong? Those are all tough questions.
Yeah, and I don't think we have all the answers yet.
No, we don't.
But it's important to start asking those questions now
Absolutely.
before these technologies become so widespread
Mhm.
that we can't put the genie back in the bottle.
It's like we're giving these algorithms the keys to the kingdom, and we need to make sure that they're using them responsibly.
Right, so it's not just about the technology itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the people who are building it
Right.
and using it.
Yeah, it's about having the right mindset,
Right.
the right ethical framework.
Yeah. So we need to be thinking about ethics
Yeah.
from the very beginning
Absolutely.
when we're designing these systems.
It needs to be baked in.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about some of the potential downsides of these emerging technologies. But what about the potential benefits?
Oh, there are definitely benefits, too.
Okay, like what?
Well, for one thing, AI can help us to make IAM systems more efficient
Okay.
and effective.
Okay.
It can automate a lot of the tasks that are currently done manually,
Right.
which can free up human workers to focus on more strategic work.
Okay, so it's not necessarily about robots taking our jobs.
No, not necessarily.
Yeah.
It's more about robots helping us to do our jobs better.
Right, so it's kind of like a collaboration
Exactly.
between humans and machines.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and what about decentralized identity?
Yeah, decentralized identity has a lot of potential, too.
Okay, like what?
Well, for one thing, it could give individuals more control over their own data,
Right.
which is something that a lot of people are concerned about these days.
Yeah, with all the data breaches and everything.
Exactly.
People are starting to realize that their data is valuable and they want to be in control of it.
Right.
And decentralized identity could give them that control.
It could, yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of like a shift in power.
It is, yeah.
From the big corporations
Right.
to the individual.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so a lot of potential there,
Mm-hmm.
but also some challenges.
For sure.
Like how do we make sure that it's secure
Right.
and how do we get everyone to buy into it?
Yeah, those are the big questions.
Okay, well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here today.
We have, yeah.
We've talked about the past, present, and future of IAM.
Mm-hmm.
We've explored the technical complexities, the ethical considerations,
Yeah.
and even the philosophical implications of this technology.
It's a fascinating topic.
It is. And I hope our listeners have enjoyed this deep dive as much as we have.
Oh, me too.
And I encourage everyone to keep learning and exploring.
Yeah, stay curious.
Because the world of IAM is constantly evolving.
Absolutely.
And there's always something new to discover.
That's right.
All right, that's it for this episode of The Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.